Hello and welcome back. Tonight, we're traveling far back in time to a world that feels both familiar and strangely alien. Picture a planet cloaked in ice, where immense glaciers stretched across continents, majestic creatures roamed frozen plains, and our earliest ancestors gathered around flickering fires, etching tools and stories into bone and stone. This was the Ice Age. Not a single frozen moment, but a long era spanning millions of years, quietly shaping the Earth we inhabit today in ways we're still discovering. Before we dive in, take a moment to get comfortable. Perhaps you're listening late at night, with the soft murmur of the world around you. Maybe you're simply curious, seeking a peaceful space to wander while learning. Either way, let's move slowly together, without hurrying or glancing at the clock. After all, while the Ice Age was frigid, its pace was so gradual that entire generations passed without noticing how much the world was transforming. It's important to realize that the Ice Age wasn't a single, endless freeze. It was a cycle, a rhythm of glacial chills and warmer periods called interglacials. Over tens of thousands of years, Earth's climate shifted back and forth, influenced by subtle changes in the planet's orbit, its tilt, and even the gentle wobble of its spin. These variations in sunlight reshaped the planet dramatically. Oceans withdrew, land bridges appeared, and entire ecosystems rose and fell like tides, only on a grand, epic scale. But let's hold off on the science for a moment. Instead, picture the world itself. Imagine standing on land that will one day become Northern Europe, North America, or Siberia. The horizon isn't dotted with cities or forests. Instead, an immense wall of ice rises, hundreds of meters tall, stretching farther than your eyes can follow. The air is sharp and dry, carrying the crisp scent of snow. Yet despite the biting cold, life persists. Across the frozen plains roam herds of woolly mammoths, their curved tusks catching the pale light. In the Americas, giant ground sloths lumber slowly, while saber-toothed cats crouch in the grass, muscles coiled, teeth glinting like polished ivory. Further south, beyond the reach of ice, forests and rivers still thrive. In these milder regions, humans find ways to survive. They follow migrating herds, hunt with stone-tipped spears, and gather around fires, sharing the small warmth the world offers. They don't know they live in what we now call the Ice Age. It's simply the life they know. And here's the fascinating part about deep history. The planet wasn't one giant frozen wasteland. While northern continents lay locked beneath ice, the equator remained warm, home to jungles and deserts. Life adapted. It moved, endured, and persisted. The Earth during the Ice Age was not only colder, it was sharper, wilder, and full of striking contrasts. This story begins long before humans appeared. For millions of years, our planet shifted between cold and warm periods, each leaving its mark in rock and soil. Scientists have unraveled this from clues trapped deep in ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland. Layer by layer, these cores capture tiny bubbles of ancient air, offering a window into the atmosphere hundreds of thousands of years ago. From this, we know the Ice Age didn't arrive suddenly. It advanced slowly, glaciers creeping forward, then retreating, then advancing again like a relentless tide, grinding rock into dust. As ice sheets grew, they reshaped the land beneath them. Mountains were carved into jagged peaks, valleys deepened, and colossal boulders were pushed across the terrain like pebbles left behind when glaciers finally receded. Even today, walking through parts of Canada, Scandinavia, or northern United States, you can see these traces. Lakes scoured by moving ice, U-shaped valleys, and rocks transported hundreds of kilometers from their origin. And it wasn't just the land that changed. Oceans dropped over 100 meters as water became trapped in ice sheets, enlarging entire continents. Asia and North America were joined by a land bridge we now call Beringia, a frozen highway across what is today the Bering Strait. This bridge didn't just shape geography, it shaped history. It served as a pathway for humans and animals to move between continents, spreading life in ways that would resonate for millennia. Picture yourself standing on that icy bridge. The wind sweeps across the open tundra, carrying snow that never fully settles. Herds of caribou and mammoths move steadily, grazing on the sparse, hardy grass that manages to survive here. Wolves stalk them from a distance, their thick fur shielding them from the cold. And trailing behind, small bands of humans press forward, wrapped in furs, their breath curling visibly in the frigid air. Every step carries them closer to a new world. What's striking is how interconnected everything was. As the ice sheets expanded, so much water was trapped that large portions of the planet dried out. Deserts grew and tropical forests shrank. What had once been endless greenery became vast open plains stretching for miles. Scientists call this immense grassland the Mammoth Steppe, spanning much of Europe, Asia, and North America. Though harsh, it teemed with life, supporting vast herds of grazers and the predators, and the first humans, brave enough to follow them. Yet the Ice Age was never static. Every few tens of thousands of years, the glaciers receded, temperatures rose, and the planet greened once more. Rivers swelled, forests returned, and the sprawling grasslands contracted. These warmer intervals were temporary, as the glaciers inevitably returned, slow but unstoppable, freezing the world again. It was during one of these milder periods that humans began to thrive, learning to shape stone into tools, paint their stories onto cave walls, and eventually step beyond the Ice Age into what we now call history. Even so, the marks of that frozen era linger. We see them not only in the landscape but in ourselves. Our migrations, myths, and even our physical traits carry traces of that time. To truly understand the Earth today, we must step back into that frozen world. Watch the glaciers creep, the great animals roam, and remember that the planet has been many things before becoming what it is now. So, let's keep moving forward into the cold. The wind rises, the horizon stretches white with snow, and yet there is still more to witness. This is only the beginning, for the Ice Age has much more to reveal. The chill didn't arrive suddenly. It spread in quiet, gradual waves so subtle that a single human lifetime could barely notice. But over thousands of years, the transformation was relentless, beginning with tiny shifts in Earth's orbit, tilt and wobble, changes so slight they would seem meaningless to anyone standing on the surface. Yet these tiny motions altered how much sunlight reached the northern reaches of the planet. Gradually, summers grew cooler. Snow that once melted every year began to linger longer, and over time, that lingering snow compacted and hardened into ice. It's almost unimaginable how different the world looked before this slow transformation took hold. Much of the northern continents were lush and green, blanketed with forests and open plains. Rivers flowed freely, and animals grazed across lands that today are frozen tundra. As centuries passed, and each summer failed to melt the snows of the previous winter, a gradual buildup began, layer upon layer, year after year, until the snow compressed under its own weight and became solid ice. From these early beginnings, the first glaciers grew, and once they began to move, nothing could stop them. The great ice sheets did not appear overnight. They advanced steadily, like silent armies inching forward. At their maximum, these glaciers were enormous, swallowing entire landscapes, burying mountains and valleys alike. The Laurentide ice sheet blanketed much of North America, covering Canada and reaching deep into what is now the United States. In Europe, the Fennoscandian ice sheet cloaked Scandinavia and pushed southward, reshaping the land beneath its immense weight. Even in the southern hemisphere, highlands in South America and New Zealand carried their own icy crowns. The very air changed as the world cooled. With so much water locked away in ice, oceans dropped, revealing stretches of land once hidden beneath the waves. Winds swept across the open plains, carrying dust for hundreds of miles, which settled in thick layers still buried in parts of China and the American Midwest. In these dry, windy conditions, forests shrank, grasslands expanded, and entire ecosystems migrated south in search of warmth. Yet the Earth is not a simple machine. Earth's climate has always been shaped by many forces working together. While shifts in the planet's orbit set the stage, they were far from the only influence on the Ice Age. Volcanic eruptions hurled ash and gases into the atmosphere, dimming sunlight and cooling the world even more. The oceans played their part too, as shifting currents trapped heat in the depths. Over time, this feedback loop of cooling reinforced itself, gradually locking the planet into a climate vastly different from the one we know today. Yet even in this frozen world, life persisted. Plants adapted to the chill, spreading along the edges of advancing glaciers, while tough grasses colonized the vast steppe. Animals followed suit. Woolly mammoths and mastodons, with thick coats and insulating fat, moved in massive herds across the bitter winds. Bison, musk oxen, and reindeer roamed the open plains, grazing tirelessly on the sparse tundra. Predators thrived as well. Saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows of the grasslands, while packs of dire wolves tracked herds across the snow. Smaller creatures survived too. Foxes darted between snowdrifts, birds migrated along ancient routes, and rodents burrowed into the frozen ground. Every living being found its niche in a world where survival was harsh but predictable. Humans arrived much later, but even before them, the Ice Age had already carved its mark into the land. As glaciers expanded, they gouged deep grooves into the earth, crushing rock and grinding it to dust. When the ice retreated, it revealed landscapes that were raw and new, dotted with lakes and rivers fed by meltwater. In some places, enormous piles of stone and gravel were left behind, the remnants of the glacier's slow, relentless march. These changes weren't merely cosmetic. They laid the groundwork for the world we inhabit today. In many ways, this era was both violent and quiet, shaping life and land in ways that would echo for millennia. Glaciers moved with unstoppable power, yet their advance was almost imperceptible within the span of a single human life. Mountains bent under their immense weight, but an animal could spend its entire existence in the shadow of the ice without noticing even the slightest shift. This is the scale of deep time, where Earth's drama unfolds in imperceptible increments, leaving marks that endure for millions of years. Had you stood at the edge of one of these early glaciers, you would have sensed it, not like a storm or a sudden gust of wind, but through the quiet heaviness of the air, the soft groan of ice slowly shifting, and the vast stillness of a frozen horizon. The sky would appear pale and dry, the sun low, and the land silent except for the distant cracking of ice as it crept forward. But this was only the beginning. Over centuries, the cold intensified, glaciers expanded, and the world entered one of the most dramatic chapters of its history. Yet this frozen planet was far from lifeless. It was alive in its own way, shaping land and sea, and setting the stage for the humans who would eventually learn to endure it. Thus, the stage was set. A planet wrapped in ice, a landscape carved by forces too immense to witness, and a world where survival demanded adaptation unlike anything any creature had faced before. From this frozen realm, the story of the Ice Age would unfold, one slow step at a time. When ice dominated the Earth, it wasn't just the land that seemed immense. The creatures roaming it were unlike anything we see today. This was an age of giants, molded by a vast and unforgiving world, where sheer size was often the key to survival. To exist in that world was to feel small, no matter who or what you were. The great herds were the first to appear. Imagine an endless, wind-swept plain, cold yet alive with motion. Woolly mammoths moved in long, steady lines, their thick coats swaying like curtains of coarse hair, tusks curved and sweeping as they dug through snow for sparse grass. These were not solitary beasts. They traveled in groups of dozens, sometimes hundreds, their footprints pressing deep into the frozen ground, carving trails that extended for miles. Alongside them roamed mastodons, stockier relatives of the mammoths, with shorter legs and straighter tusks, well suited for the patchwork forests clinging to the edges of glacial plains. They tore at branches and bark with relentless determination, moving from one grove of sheltering trees to the next. But mammoths and mastodons were only part of this frozen procession. The grasslands teemed with bison, their massive shoulders and thick fur shielding them from the piercing wind. Musk oxen, low and broad, huddled in tight defensive circles when predators approached. Reindeer, ancestors of today's caribou, migrated ceaselessly, their hooves striking the hard earth in a rhythm as ancient as the glaciers themselves. Predators followed closely. Dire wolves prowled the edges of the herds, larger and stronger than their modern descendants, teeth built to crush bone with ease. Saber-toothed cats, with their long, curved fangs, crouched among the sparse shrubs, ready to strike prey far larger than themselves. Cave lions, lean yet nearly twice the size of modern lions, roamed the steppe, hunting in coordinated groups capable of challenging even the most formidable herbivores. And towering above this harsh, dramatic world were the glaciers themselves. These titanic rivers of ice stretched across the horizon like frozen walls, their sheer faces fractured by deep blue crevasses. They moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, yet their presence was impossible to ignore. The air around them carried a chill that cut through even the thickest fur. Every crack of shifting ice echoed for miles, a deep, haunting sound that reminded every creature of the power lurking just beyond reach. But the glaciers were not static. They advanced and retreated, grinding over continents, stripping away soil, and reshaping the world beneath. Where they passed, bare rock was left exposed, valleys carved, rivers and lakes later filled their wake, and cliffs and ridges shaped migration paths for animals, creating new opportunities for predators that followed. Life persisted in the shadow of these frozen giants. It adapted in astonishing ways. Many Ice Age animals carried thick layers of fat beneath dense fur, insulating them from bitter winds. Some even evolved specialized blood circulation to keep their limbs from freezing. Humans, too, learned to coexist with these colossal creatures. Mammoths were both a threat and a lifeline. Their bones provided shelter, their hides became clothing, and their meat offered the calories small hunting bands needed to survive long, bitter nights. Even so, the scale of the Ice Age world dwarfed any single life. A glacier could stretch hundreds of miles. A mammoth herd could take days to pass from one horizon to another, and the pale sky reflected endlessly off ice and snow. This was not a world of comfort. It demanded endurance. In return, it forged humans and animals alike into remarkably resilient survivors. Standing there, you would witness the earth at its rawest. The air sharp enough to sting. The distant groan of glaciers shifting like ancient beasts. Animals larger than houses moving deliberately across the horizon. Every part of it spoke of a planet shaped by forces far beyond any one creature's control. And yet, balance existed. Glaciers advanced and retreated. Giants thrived, yet some fell to hunters or vanished when food ran out. Life endured, not by conquering the cold, but by learning to live within it. Over these frozen millennia, this balance was tested again and again. Climate shifted, ice gave way to warmth, then returned. Animals migrated, adapted, or disappeared, while humans kept learning, observing, and following the slow rhythm of Earth and its ice-bound giants. As we move deeper into this frozen past, the focus turns to the engine behind it all. The strange, intricate cycles of the planet's climate and how they set each of these events into motion. The cold was never constant. Even at the height of the Ice Age, Earth was not locked in a single, unchanging freeze. It breathed. Over tens of thousands of years, temperatures rose and fell like a slow tide. And with every subtle shift, glaciers advanced or retreated, reshaping land and life alike. To truly understand this world, it's not enough to imagine a planet buried in snow. We must see how the ice moved, how the cold deepened and eased, and how these long, quiet changes wrote the story of the Ice Age. At the heart of this rhythm were cycles that we can still trace today. Scientists call these the Milankovitch cycles, named after the mathematician who first calculated their patterns. They are driven by the way Earth moves around the sun, not in a perfect circle, but in a long, slow dance that unfolds over tens of thousands of years. Our orbit stretches and relaxes. The tilt of Earth's axis leans a little more, then a little less. Even the planet's gentle wobble, like a spinning top losing speed, shifts the way sunlight falls across the world. Each of these motions occurs so gradually that a single generation can hardly notice, yet together they transform everything. When the tilt is smaller, summers in the northern hemisphere grow cooler. Snow that falls in winter lingers into the following year, and ice slowly accumulates. When the tilt increases, summers warm, melting more snow, and the glaciers retreat. It is a subtle, relentless balance, swinging the planet from cold to less cold and back again over immense spans of time. Yet orbital changes alone cannot explain the full force of the Ice Age. Earth's climate is a web of feedbacks, where one shift triggers another. Expanding glaciers reflect more sunlight, cooling the planet further. Colder oceans draw down more carbon dioxide, lowering greenhouse gases and intensifying the chill. This chain reaction takes millennia to build, and even longer to reverse. The process works in reverse too. When warming begins, ice melts, exposing dark land and open water that absorb more heat. Oceans release carbon dioxide, trapping additional warmth. The feedback loop flips and glaciers retreat. Earth does not simply enter or leave an ice age. It swings between these states like a vast pendulum, steady in its motion, yet immense in scale. Within these grand cycles there were smaller jolts. Sudden pulses of cold or warmth rippled across the Ice Age world. Some came from shifting ocean currents, redistributing heat between equator and poles. Others were sparked by massive volcanic eruptions, sending ash and sulfur high into the sky and dimming sunlight for years. At the edges of glaciers, enormous lakes sometimes formed behind ice dams. When these barriers broke, floods reshaped coastlines and may have influenced climate for centuries. Living through these changes meant witnessing the world tilt slowly out of balance, then settle again. For animals roaming the steppe and forests, it meant moving with the land. Herds of mammoths and bison pushed south when the cold deepened, spreading north again as ice withdrew. Predators followed. Early humans, small bands of hunters and gatherers, learned to read these patterns, moving with the seasons and shifting edges of the cold. The glaciers themselves recorded these swings in silent detail. Each layer of ice trapped tiny bubbles of ancient air as snow fell and compressed over the years. When scientists drill deep into these layers, they can read the planet breathing, a record of Earth's slow, majestic rhythm. Scientists uncover the fingerprints of every glacial advance and retreat, every sudden drop or rise in temperature. In that frozen archive, the history of the Ice Age is preserved, layer upon layer of winters stacked atop one another. A library of deep time. Reading about this rhythm is one thing. Imagining it is another. Picture yourself standing on a wide, cold plain. The sky is pale, the wind sharp. Far to the north, a wall of ice rises like a mountain range. For centuries, it has been creeping forward, mile by mile. A slow invasion invisible to any living eye. Then, after thousands of years, the air warms. Summers stretch longer. The glacier's edge begins to pull back. Meltwater streams carve new rivers. Land once buried beneath ice lies bare, raw, exposed to sunlight for the first time in ages. And in time, the cold returns, and the glaciers begin their slow march once more. This was the breath of the Ice Age. Steady, relentless, powerful enough to sculpt continents. It was not a single freeze or a one-time event, but a vast, patient cycle pushing life to its limits and then pulling it back again. Across these long oscillations, animals evolved, humans adapted, and the Earth gradually became the world we recognize today, even if much of its past has vanished beneath modern warmth. Yet the story of the Ice Age is not only about cold and warmth. It is about life that endured in that frozen light. While the climate set the stage, it was life itself, strange, massive, resilient, that gave the Ice Age its character. Beneath endless snow and sweeping plains of ice, life did more than wait for warmth to return. It adapted, evolved, and carved out niches in one of the harshest environments Earth has ever seen. Surviving the chill required more than endurance. It demanded transformation, from the tiniest insect hiding beneath snow to the largest beasts roaming frozen steppes. The ground itself was not lifeless. Beneath the snow lay a hidden world in miniature. Rodents dug complex burrows in tundra soils, shielded by layers of frost and earth. Lemmings, voles, and other small mammals formed the base of the food chain, their survival supporting countless predators above. Many stayed active under the snowpack, moving through tunnels invisible from the surface. Down there, air was still, temperature stable, and the insulating snow shielded them from the worst of the wind. Above, larger animals crossed the frozen landscape with heavy, deliberate steps. Woolly mammoths, wrapped in coats of long coarse hair with dense insulating underlayers, could endure temperatures that would freeze exposed skin in minutes. Their blood carried adaptations that allowed oxygen to flow to their coldest limbs, preventing stiffness. Musk oxen had thick pelts so efficient that snow could settle atop them without melting, a sign that almost no heat escaped. Predators were equally prepared. Dire wolves and saber-toothed cats possessed immense strength and stamina, with powerful muscles built for hunting in deep snow. Their thick coats and broad paws kept them from sinking as they stalked prey. Even the great cave lions, some of the largest cats to ever walk Earth, were shaped by the cold. Leaner than their modern relatives, but with limbs built for chasing Ice Age prey across open ground. And the plants that sustained this frozen world were no less remarkable, forming the foundation of an ecosystem as extraordinary as the animals it supported. At first glance, the Ice Age landscape might appear barren, yet just beneath the snow and during the brief summers, resilient vegetation thrived. Grasses stretched across the Mammoth Steppe, blanketing vast regions from Europe to North America. These nutrient-rich grasses were perfectly suited to sustain herds that had to eat nearly constantly to survive the cold. Interspersed among them grew tough shrubs and dwarf willows, their branches hugging the ground for protection against the relentless wind. These plants had adapted to endure long winters of darkness, yet respond swiftly to the fleeting sunlight of short summers. Even insects found ways to survive. Some produced natural antifreeze proteins, preventing their cells from freezing. Others laid eggs able to endure the harsh winter, awaiting the warmth of summer to hatch. Birds adapted as well. While many migrated south, some remained, their dense feathers and high metabolisms allowing them to thrive in the extreme cold. The snowy owl, for instance, patrolled the tundra year-round, hunting lemmings and surviving where few others could. Humans, though physically fragile compared to the giants around them, relied on ingenuity. Early hunters and gatherers crafted clothing from furs, stitched tightly to trap warmth. Shelters were built from bone and hide, using mammoth ribs as tent frames, covered with thick animal skins. Fire was their greatest ally, providing warmth, cooking food, hardening tools, and warding off the darkness and cold. For these small groups, life was a constant negotiation with the Ice Age. Each step across the snow carried risks: frostbite, hunger, predators. Yet they learned to move with the seasons, tracking migrating herds, navigating by rivers and coastlines, and sharpening weapons from stone and bone to pierce thick hides. Over time, their understanding of this frozen world grew, allowing them to live not just despite the cold, but because they mastered it. What made this hidden web of life remarkable was its balance. Snow did not simply bury the world, it shaped it. Beneath its weight, species learned resilience. Arctic foxes still shift their coats from brown to white with the seasons, vanishing into the snow like fleeting ghosts. These living remnants remind us that the Ice Age did not end neatly. Fragments of it remain scattered across the planet, persisting even today. As glaciers breathed in and out, the cold deepening and easing, the hidden world beneath the snow continued to transform. What lay ahead was a planet in motion, one where ice would carve the land, reshaping the very bones of the earth. Glaciers were never still. They moved with a power so immense and relentless that entire continents were molded in their wake. When we picture glaciers, we often imagine silent, frozen walls. But these great ice sheets were engines of change, grinding, crushing, and sculpting the land with patience only Earth itself could sustain. The largest blankets of ice covered much of the northern hemisphere. In North America, the Laurentide ice sheet stretched from the high Arctic down to the modern central United States, so thick in places that its surface towered above the tallest mountains. Across the Atlantic, the Fennoscandian ice sheet covered Scandinavia, pushing deep into northern Europe, its edge creeping forward like a tide of frozen stone. Even the southern hemisphere bore ice. Smaller sheets draped the highlands of South America, New Zealand, and parts of Antarctica, extending farther than today's ice. These sheets were not gentle. They scraped the earth bare, stripping forests, flattening hills, and grinding rock into fine powder. Beneath their weight, the crust itself bowed, sinking under the immense load. When the ice retreated, the land slowly rose again, a rebound that continues in regions of Canada and Scandinavia. The movements of glaciers left behind landscapes still recognizable today. Deep valleys with flat floors and steep walls, enormous boulders transported hundreds of miles, now scattered like silent witnesses of journeys long past. And then there were the lakes, thousands of them, filling basins carved by ice. The Great Lakes of North America, resting in the scars of the Laurentide ice sheet, are perhaps the most famous example. Glaciers sculpted not only the land but also the waters of the world. As ice grew, sea levels fell, exposing vast coastal plains. When ice melted, the seas rose again, submerging those same lands. Land bridges, like the one connecting Asia to North America, existed only because vast amounts of water were trapped in ice. Each advance and retreat of glaciers rewrote Earth's map. Yet despite their immense power, glaciers moved slowly, only a few feet each day, yet enough to alter the face of continents. Standing before one was to confront a force that felt eternal, even in motion. Sometimes you could hear it, sharp cracks of shifting ice, the low groan of frozen mass pressing against the ground. When meltwater broke free, it surged across the landscape in floods so immense they carved new channels within days. Rivers born of centuries of trapped water suddenly unleashed. And yet, in their wake, glaciers left opportunity. Retreating ice revealed raw, mineral-rich soil, ready for colonization. Plants took root quickly, followed by animals, and eventually the first human hunters, tracking herds into lands unveiled by retreating ice. These frozen giants also preserved stories in their layers. Within the ice, scientists find traces of ancient air, ash from distant volcanoes, and pollen from long-extinct plants. Each layer is a record, a page in Earth's frozen history, telling not only how glaciers shaped the land, but how they breathed in time with the climate. To the creatures living through it, however, the glaciers were not merely history, they were life itself. It was not a bridge at all. It was a living, breathing landscape, rich with life and as real as any other part of the Earth. Farther south, the Sunda Shelf linked the islands of Southeast Asia to the mainland, creating a continuous landmass. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania merged into one connected continent. Across Europe, the North Sea floor emerged as Doggerland, a broad plain stretching between Britain and the continent, crisscrossed by rivers and low hills. These changes were more than geography, they reshaped life itself. Animals followed the expanding lands, migrating where seas had once barred them. Humans tracked game across these new pathways, gradually spreading across the globe and shaping the future of our species. The retreating oceans also transformed coastlines. Beaches extended for miles, estuaries shrank, and coral reefs were left high and dry, bleaching as the water withdrew. Ocean temperatures dropped, salinity increased, and currents shifted in response to the changing balance of ice and water. The exposed continental shelves became sources of dust, swept up by Ice Age winds and carried for thousands of miles, eventually forming the thick, fertile soils that would nourish the richest farmlands on Earth. The Ice Age was not only an age of loss, it was an age of preparation, laying the foundation for the world to come. Yet for those living through it, these shifts were subtle. The sea did not vanish overnight. A hunter could walk paths his ancestors had trodden, unaware that far to the east or west, the tide was retreating slowly year by year. Only across generations did the transformation become apparent. Rivers flowing where bays once lay, herds grazing on lands that had been ocean floor, new horizons opening to those brave enough to follow them. Even as oceans receded, life adapted. Coasts became hunting grounds, river mouths turned into feeding grounds for birds and fish, and humans learned to exploit these changes, following animals across the newly exposed plains. In every corner of the Ice Age world, the retreating waters revealed not just land, but opportunity. Yet, just like the glaciers themselves, the oceans were never meant to remain fixed. As the climate gradually warmed, the ice began to retreat, and the seas slowly reclaimed the lands they had left exposed. Doggerland sank beneath the North Sea, Beringia disappeared under the waters of the Bering Strait, and coastlines across the globe began to resemble more closely the shapes we recognize today. But that chapter was still far ahead. In the heart of the Ice Age, the oceans had paused. The planet stood in a frozen equilibrium, a delicate balance of ice and sea that held the world steady for thousands of years. Within this frozen stillness, the winds began to rise, carrying dust across the continents and introducing the next great force shaping the ancient world. The cold alone did not define the Ice Age. Alongside the glaciers and low seas came skies heavy with fine particles, and winds that never seemed to rest. The atmosphere was not the clear, crisp air one might imagine in a frozen world. Instead, it was thick with dust, turning the sunlight dim and coloring the sky in muted, pale tones. This dust originated from the land exposed by retreating ice. As glaciers advanced, they ground rocks into fine powder. When the ice receded or paused, powerful winds lifted these particles into the air, driving them for hundreds, even thousands of miles. Each storm added more grains, spreading blankets of dust far from their source. In many regions, these layers remain to this day, loose deposits stretching across China, Europe, and North America, sometimes hundreds of feet thick. Over millennia, these dusty plains would become some of the most fertile soils on Earth. During the Ice Age itself, however, They were part of a relentless cycle: wind, dust, and biting cold. The climate of the Ice Age was harsh and unpredictable. Vast temperature contrasts between the frozen north and the slightly warmer south fueled powerful winds. These winds scoured the land, compressing snow into hard, icy sheets, and swept away what little warmth existed. They carried snow and dust alike, piling it into drifts that could bury entire landscapes. Yet the Ice Age skies were not defined solely by wind and dust. They were a world of extremes. Winters were long, bitter, and far colder than most humans today could imagine. Summers, though brief, could bring surprising warmth in some regions, particularly across the open grasslands where the sun's rays met little resistance. This dramatic swing between seasons demanded that life be endlessly adaptable, able to survive deep freezes, yet ready to burst into activity during the short periods of growth and abundance. Volcanoes added chaos to this already unusual sky. Massive eruptions sent ash into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and deepening the cold for years. Ice cores still preserve traces of these events, evidence of times when darkness fell across the land and glaciers pressed even further south. Even the air itself was different. Carbon dioxide levels during the Ice Age were far lower than today, creating a thin greenhouse blanket that made the atmosphere colder and drier, particularly near the great ice sheets. In these regions, snowfall was rare, not because of warmth, but because the air held so little moisture. In a paradoxical twist, the frozen heart of the Ice Age often resembled a desert. Vast, windswept, snow-swept, and unforgiving. Its surface was sculpted by wind rather than buried under fresh snow. For the creatures inhabiting this world, the weather was far more than a passing concern. It dictated every movement and decision. Herds of mammoths and bison tracked the shifting gusts, seeking spots where snow had been swept away, revealing the nourishing grasses beneath. Predators followed closely, their survival intricately linked to these same patterns. Even early humans learned to read the sky, observing clouds and winds to anticipate sudden shifts in temperature or incoming storms. Dust carried its own influence. While it dulled the sunlight and coated the ground, it also nourished life. Winds scattered mineral-rich particles across the plains, enriching soils and making the Ice Age grasslands unexpectedly fertile. This delicate paradox, a sky heavy with dust and gusting winds, yet a land capable of sustaining enormous herds, was one of the quiet marvels of the Ice Age world. Imagine standing on one of these endless, windswept plains. The horizon stretches wide and pale. The air bites, sharp and relentless, and the wind never fully ceases. A distant haze lingers, a veil of dust lifted from storms hundreds of miles away. Above, the sun casts a weak, pale glow, its warmth touching the land but never enough to erase the chill. In that instant, you sense what it meant to live beneath an Ice Age sky. Harsh, ceaseless, yet brimming with life. This atmosphere was more than mere backdrop. It was a shaping force. It carried the seeds of the world below, feeding and defining the vast grasslands that became the Ice Age's signature landscape. The endless steppe where giants roamed and survival unfolded on a scale as immense as the land itself. Stretching from Western Europe, across Siberia, and reaching into North America, this was a terrain unlike anything seen today. Neither fully frozen tundra nor dense forest. It was an expansive, windswept grassland supporting some of the largest gatherings of animals in Earth's history. Scientists call it the mammoth steppe the pulsing heart of the Ice Age world. Larger than any single biome on Earth today, it thrived under cold, dry air and brief summers. Despite its apparent harshness, the grasslands were astonishingly productive. Tough grasses and hardy herbs carpeted the ground, perfectly adapted to the short growing season. These plants stayed low, hugging the earth to shield themselves from the relentless wind, anchoring firmly in the thin, dusty soils left by retreating glaciers. It was this abundance that allowed the giants to flourish. Woolly mammoths roamed the steppe in great numbers, tusks sweeping snow aside to uncover the grasses below. Steppe bison grazed in endless lines, their dense coats rippling in the wind. Wild horses, smaller and stockier than their modern descendants, moved in tightly knit herds across the open plains, filling the landscape with life and motion. Among them wandered the woolly rhinoceroses, massive, broad-shouldered giants whose thick horns pushed through snow or fended off predators daring enough to approach. The predators of the mammoth steppe were no less formidable. Packs of dire wolves tracked the herds, their powerful jaws and larger frames giving them the strength to overpower even the most resilient prey. Cave lions, nearly twice the size of modern lions, hunted in organized groups, skirting the edges of the grasslands with silent precision. And the saber-toothed cats waited in ambush, their curved fangs designed to strike quickly and fatally. Yet it was not only the great beasts that thrived here. Smaller creatures filled every niche. Lemmings and ground squirrels burrowed beneath the frozen soil, their tunnels crisscrossing unseen beneath the surface. Arctic foxes darted across the plains, scavenging from predator kills or hunting the rodents hidden below. Ravens and vultures circled overhead, descending when snow was marked red by a fresh kill. Humans arrived later than these other inhabitants, but when they did, they became part of the landscape. Early hunters tracked the herds across the open steppe, observing the patterns of mammoths and bison, testing their own skills against the vast frozen wilderness. They built shelters from mammoth bones, layered with hides to keep out the relentless wind, and painted the animals they hunted on cave walls, records of both admiration and survival. What made the mammoth steppe remarkable was not just its immense size, but its consistency. For thousands of years, it remained a world apart, shaped by the cold yet protected by its own rhythms. Grasses endured beneath the snow, dormant in winter but bursting to life under the summer sun. This cycle of freeze and renewal sustained an intricate web of life, resilient against the encroaching glaciers. Even as ice advanced and retreated along its margins, the richness of this land can still be glimpsed today. In Siberia, frozen within the permafrost, mammoth remains are preserved so well that their fur clings to their hides, and their stomachs still hold the grasses they once ate. These silent relics tell the story of a world where life thrived even in the shadow of ice. A land hard, dry, yet abundant enough to feed giants. Standing amidst it would have been overwhelming. The horizon stretched endlessly, unbroken by forests or mountains. Winds swept across the plains, carrying the faint echoes of distant herds and the calls of hunting predators. Every creature, from the smallest rodent to the largest mammoth, participated in a vast, interwoven system, turning grass and dust into flesh and bone on a scale nearly impossible to grasp. Yet this world, vast and enduring as it was, relied on the cold for its balance. When the climate shifted, when glaciers receded and forests crept northward, the steppe began to shrink. Its once great herds were confined to ever smaller refuges until, eventually, the grassland of giants became a memory, preserved only in fossils and frozen bones. Before that day came, however, the mammoth steppe stood as one of Earth's grandest natural stages. Here, humans honed the skills of survival. Here, the last great Ice Age beasts roamed. And here, in this cold, dusty grassland, life learned resilience that would echo long after the steppe itself vanished. Across this vast plain and along the ice's edges, small bands of humans moved with the seasons. They were not yet masters of this frozen realm, but they were learning. In a land ruled by biting winds and towering beasts, survival required more than strength. It demanded knowledge, skill, and the ability to adapt. Life for these early humans revolved around the cold. They built shelters low against the wind, using whatever materials the treeless steppe provided. Mammoth bones, ribs, tusks, and skulls formed sturdy frames, covered with hides to create huts that could withstand the harshest winter blasts. Inside, spaces were cramped but warm, illuminated by the glow of a single vital force: fire. Fire was more than a tool. It was the boundary between survival and death. Around its warmth, families huddled, furs drawn tight, hands outstretched toward the life-giving heat that it cooked their food, strengthened their weapons, and provided a shield against the long, relentless darkness of Ice Age nights. A single flickering flame could be the difference between safety and exposure in a world where the cold waited just beyond their walls, patient, silent, and unforgiving. But fire alone could not ensure survival. Humans learned to shape stone into knives, scrapers, and spear points sharp enough to pierce the thick hides of mammoths and bison. They crafted tools from bone and antler, each one carefully made out of necessity, honed by experience and precision. Hunting in this frozen world demanded coordination and cooperation. Small bands of humans worked together to track herds across open plains, driving prey into ambushes or toward hunters armed with spears. A single successful hunt could sustain a group for days. A failed one could mean hunger and hardship. Even amid the cold, humans found ways to create. In caves and shelters across Europe and Asia, they left behind intricate paintings and carvings. Mammoths, bison, horses, and reindeer adorned walls with careful detail, revealing intimate knowledge of the creatures they relied on. These artworks were more than decoration. They may have taught, remembered, or inspired hope, proof that even in a world dominated by survival, there was space for expression. Clothing evolved into a vital tool of adaptation. Furs were stitched together with bone needles, layered until no chill could penetrate. Boots lined with grass and hide protected their feet from freezing temperatures. Each garment reflected generations of trial and error, refined to face relentless wind and snow while allowing humans to continue moving. The cold demanded such ingenuity. Every tool, every fire, every shelter was an answer to a single question: how do we endure here? Gradually, humans learned not just to survive, but to thrive. They observed animals, studying migration patterns and the ways herds used the landscape. They followed them to fresh grazing lands, drank from rivers fed by melting glaciers, and mapped their world not with ink or symbols, but through memory and experience. During long, dark nights, stories carried around the fire while the wind howled outside their bone and hide walls. Voices spoke of hunts, dangers faced, and the vast, extraordinary world around them. These tales were more than comfort. They were instruction, teaching each generation how to survive in a land where one misstep could be fatal. Yet even in this harsh, unforgiving environment, there were moments of quiet connection, fleeting sparks of warmth, companionship, and understanding amid the endless cold. A fire crackled softly in the dark. A child nestled against their mother, warmth held tight beneath layers of fur, while the quiet murmur of voices mingled with the howl of the wind outside. In these moments, the Ice Age was more than a trial of endurance. It was a place where humans began to mold themselves into the adaptable, resilient beings they would one day become. They were not alone in this frozen expanse. Other humans, like the Neanderthals, shared parts of this harsh world. They too mastered the cold, constructing shelters and hunting the same roaming herds. Some groups may have exchanged tools, shared knowledge, or even joined together, leaving traces of interconnected lives that still echo in our DNA today. Under the pale Ice Age sun, survival and innovation began to intertwine. Humanity's story was slowly etched in firelight and shadow. These were not bustling cities or sprawling civilizations. They were small bands of people, bound by necessity, shaped by the land they traversed. Every step, every decision, every spark they lit in the snow was part of a gradual, persistent march forward. A quiet resolve to persist in a world seemingly designed to push them back. And as the fires flickered against the dark, the cold outside remained relentless. Ice still stretched across the horizon. Winds still carried dust over the plains. Yet within these fragile circles of warmth, humans endured. Through endurance, they began to transform their world, leaving marks that would outlast the ice itself. The cold did not crush them, it tempered them. And in that tempering, humanity took the first steps toward everything that would follow. By the glow of their fires, pressed against the walls of bone and hide shelters, humans began to do more than survive. They learned to shape their environment. Every tool chipped from stone, every line etched on a cave wall, was a step toward mastering the Ice Age rather than merely enduring it. Stone became their most trusted ally. From riverbeds and cliffs, they gathered flint and chert, striking deliberately to create sharp edges. The first tools were simple flakes, useful for scraping hides or cutting meat. Over generations, these tools became more refined. Hunters learned to craft long, narrow blades that could be affixed to spears, transforming them into weapons capable of bringing down the largest animals of the steppe. Bone and antler were shaped into barbed points and hooks, tools designed for precision rather than brute force. These implements were not only instruments of survival but evidence of foresight, of the ability to imagine a solution before it was needed. Tools were not only for hunting. Scrapers smoothed hides into workable leather for clothing. Awls pierced holes for stitching, allowing humans to craft garments tight enough to block wind. In a world where exposure could be deadly, a well-made coat or pair of boots was as essential as any weapon. Alongside these practical tools emerged something unexpected: art. Deep inside caves, far from sunlight, humans left marks that would endure for tens of thousands of years. A record of creativity, observation, and the human impulse to leave a trace. They painted the shapes of mammoths, bison, and wild horses, outlined in ochre and charcoal. Some drawings were simple silhouettes, while others showed entire herds, captured with such precision that even now their muscles and motion feel alive. On the walls, handprints remain, pressed into stone as if those who lived then were reaching across the ages. leaving behind a mark to say, "We were here, we saw this world, and we wanted it remembered." No one can be certain why they created these images. Perhaps they were part of rituals, meant to bring luck in the hunt or to honor the creatures they relied on. Maybe they served as lessons for the young, teaching them to recognize the movements and forms of the animals they would one day track. Or perhaps they were simply an expression of something deeply human, the need to create. Even in a world dominated by cold and hardship, carvings began to appear as well. Small figures shaped from bone and ivory. Some resembled animals, others the human form itself. The most famous are the Venus figurines, rounded, stylized depictions of the body. Their true meaning is lost to time, but they speak of minds occupied not only with survival, but with symbol, with story, with imagination. At the same time, humans developed new ways of living together. Hunters worked in tightly coordinated groups, driving animals into traps or toward waiting spears. They tracked migrations, memorized landscapes, and carried this knowledge in stories and teachings. Around their fires, they shared skills: how to strike stone into blades, how to stitch hides into clothing, how to ford a river swollen with glacial melt. Nothing was written, yet nothing was forgotten. Each lesson passed from parent to child, forming an unbroken chain of survival through the centuries of ice. Even fire itself was transformed. Early humans learned not just to preserve flames, but to summon them at will. With flint and pyrite, sparks leapt into dry tinder, coaxed into life until they grew into steady fire. No longer an accident of nature stolen from lightning, fire had become theirs to command. In that control lay the foundation for everything that came after. And yet, it was art that revealed the deepest change. In the flickering glow of torches, cave walls became more than stone. They became canvases for memory and meaning. Among the painted mammoths and bison in red and black, people could see not only the world as it was, but as they understood it. They were no longer just enduring the Ice Age. They were beginning to define it. In these quiet shelters, hidden from the relentless wind and snow, the first sparks of human culture were taking shape. Tools grew sharper, shelters stronger, art more intricate. Piece by piece, they were no longer merely resisting the cold. They were learning to bend it to their will. And yet, even as humans learned to shape their surroundings, they remained only a fragile thread in the vast fabric of the Ice Age world. Beyond the glow of their fires and the safety of their shelters, the land was still ruled by predators, masters of survival forged in the grip of endless cold. If people were to hold their place in this wilderness, they had to share the step with these hunters, walking the same trails, breathing the same frozen air, and facing the same relentless struggle. The Ice Age was not simply a realm of herds and hunters armed with spears. It was also the kingdom of predators, creatures sharpened by the harsh climate into near-perfect instruments of survival. To cross those frozen plains was to live with constant vigilance, knowing that danger prowled in silence, as much a part of the landscape as the snow, the wind, or the shadows stretching across the horizon. Among the most iconic were the saber-toothed cats, their curved fangs now emblems of the Ice Age itself. These enormous blades of bone and enamel could drive deep into the flesh of their prey. Built not for long pursuits but for explosive power, their bodies were compact and muscular, with immense strength concentrated in their shoulders and neck. They lay hidden in brush or near river valleys, waiting for the moment when a mammoth calf or a lone bison wandered too close. When they struck, it was sudden and overwhelming, an ambush finished in seconds. Even the smaller hunters carved out their own place in the hierarchy of fear. The wolverine, small yet ferocious, was a relentless scavenger capable of chasing off creatures many times its size. Foxes lingered at the margins of hunts, quick and cunning, darting in to snatch scraps whenever the chance arose. Overhead, raptors wheeled in the sky, waiting patiently for the moment they could swoop down on the remains left behind by the giants of the ice. Humans were not outside of this chain. They were woven into it. Each time they stepped beyond the safety of their shelters, whether to stalk prey or to scavenge, they risked crossing paths with predators. One mistake, a moment's carelessness, could turn a hunter into hunted. This constant danger demanded caution. It forced people to move together in numbers, to guard their fires, to let the flames burn through the night as both warmth and warning. That circle of firelight was a fragile barrier, but enough to keep the encroaching dark at bay. The bond between humans and predators was not defined by fear alone, but also by rivalry and a grudging respect. When hunters followed the trails of bison, they often discovered they were not the only ones on the path. A pack of dire wolves might be tracking the same herd. When they stumbled upon the carcass of a mammoth, they sometimes found a saber-tooth already crouched over its kill. In such encounters, survival depended less on brute strength and more on judgment, knowing when to press forward, when to pull back, and when to wait until the larger predator had taken its fill. Yet over time, humans found ways to shift the balance. Spears gave their arms reach. Fire gave them a weapon even the fiercest beasts hesitated to confront. Slowly, they ceased to be prey that fought in desperation. They became competitors, rivals too dangerous to dismiss. Still, this was not yet dominance. It was more like a truce, an uneasy coexistence on the endless steppe where every creature, great or small, fought for the same scarce reserves of meat and fat. The presence of predators shaped humans as surely as it shaped the herds. Vigilance became second nature. Every movement had to be planned, every sound weighed, every step measured against the risk of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. But perhaps in this constant tension, humans discovered something deeper, the power of unity. Alone, a person was vulnerable, but gathered together around firelight with sharpened tools in hand and voices raised, they stood a chance. The Ice Age never allowed forgetfulness. Beyond the reach of the flames, danger was always waiting. The predators of the permafrost were living reminders that survival was never guaranteed. And yet, within that crucible of fear and struggle, humans honed not only their weapons, but their minds, transforming themselves into something more than just another animal roaming the frozen plains. As the great predators prowled the snowy plains and the wind swept endlessly across the frozen steppe, the stage was set for a contest that would decide the fate of the giants who ruled this land. A struggle that would determine which species would endure and which would vanish into the long memory of the Ice Age. The world of the Ice Age was defined by scale. Everywhere one looked, there was something larger, stranger, or more formidable than anything alive today. It was not only the mammoths or the saber-toothed cats. Across every continent, in landscapes shaped by ice and relentless winds, lived creatures so immense and unusual that they seem almost mythical now, reminders of how much wilder this planet once was. On the sweeping grasslands, mammoth herds were only the beginning. Beside them moved the woolly rhinoceroses, heavy-shouldered and wrapped in thick fur, their forward-curving horns like natural lances. These animals were strong enough to withstand almost any predator. Yet they shared the steppe with towering bison, stocky wild horses, and musk oxen built to endure the unforgiving cold. Farther south, where the glaciers loosened their grip and gave way to forests and open plains, other giants held dominion. Mastodons, smaller than their mammoth cousins but equally powerful, moved among the trees, stripping bark with their trunks. Ground sloths the size of cars lumbered across the Americas, tearing branches and roots with massive claws. And wherever these slow-moving plant eaters wandered, predators shadowed them. The short-faced bear, taller and faster than any bear alive today, stalked the grasslands of North America, its long legs giving it surprising speed and power. In Australia, the Ice Age world took on an even stranger form. Gigantic kangaroos bounded across the land, sharing space with marsupial lions, predators unlike anything else on Earth. Towering flightless birds, heavier than ostriches, stalked the open country, while ancient reptiles, larger than their modern descendants, haunted rivers and swamps with armored hides and crushing jaws. Even the seas carried their own wonders. Lowered sea levels revealed new coasts and hunting grounds for humans and animals alike. In the shallow waters, the enormous Steller's sea cow, kin to the manatee, grazed on kelp beds, while great sharks prowled the deeper oceans as they had for ages. Life in the Ice Age was not bound to land alone. It was a web of giants, stretching across the globe. What made this world even more extraordinary was its richness. The mammoth steppe and its neighboring ecosystems were among the most productive ever to exist, sustaining vast herds of grazers and the predators that pursued them. Food was never easy to find, but the cold, arid conditions gave rise to endless grasslands that reached across continents, creating an unbroken stage for migrations and hunts. Humans, too, walked among these giants, caught in a fragile balance. To hunt a mammoth or a bison was to gamble with life itself, but the reward was too great to ignore. A single successful hunt could sustain an entire group, offering not only meat but also bone for tools and hide for warmth and shelter. Yet, sharing the land with powerful predators meant every hunt carried risks, not only of losing a kill, but of losing one's life. In this world of giants, survival required more than strength. It demanded observation. Humans became careful students of the wilderness, memorizing the behavior of every animal they encountered. They noticed how bison gathered tightly before a storm, how mammoths followed the same ancient trails to reach grazing grounds, how predators lingered at the edges of herds, waiting for a moment of weakness. Every fragment of knowledge could spell the difference between survival and disaster. And still, for all its dangers, this was a land of breathtaking abundance. Picture yourself standing atop a ridge, gazing out over the frozen steppe. Before you, an ocean of movement unfolds. Mammoths plowing through drifts of snow, bison kicking frost into the air, horses snorting and stamping against the cold. In the distance, dark silhouettes of predators trail the herds with silent patience, while vultures circle above, waiting for the inevitable. Everywhere you look, the world is raw, immense, and untamed. But such abundance was delicate. It was bound together by the cold itself, by the vast glaciers and the endless steppe they nurtured. As the climate shifted and the ice began its slow retreat, this world of giants would falter. Forests would spread across open plains. Rivers would swell and carve new paths. and many of the creatures that had ruled the Ice Age would face challenges they could not endure. Yet before that change arrived, this wilder Earth thrived. It was in this era, among mammoths, saber-tooths, and towering sloths, that humans refined their tools, sharpened their minds, and hardened their resolve. They did not merely exist in the shadows of giants. They learned from them, and as the glaciers loosened their grip, the bond between humans and these massive beasts would shift in ways that forever altered the story of the Ice Age. The end of the Ice Age did not come with a single sudden thaw. It was not a swift collapse of glaciers or an overnight warming of the world. Instead, it unfolded slowly, unevenly, a gradual loosening of the frozen grasp that had ruled the planet for tens of thousands of years. The changes were subtle at first. Summers stretched just a little longer, snows melted more thoroughly, and the vast sheets of ice began to soften at their edges. What had once seemed eternal now stirred with movement. Streams of meltwater trickled across the glacier's surface, widening into rivers that carved deep channels through the land. Buried torrents burst free from beneath the ice, carrying with them stones and silt, reshaping valleys and cutting new paths. Lakes pooled where ice blocked their flow, only to vanish in sudden, catastrophic floods when those barriers gave way. Floods that ripped across the land, leaving scars carved deep into the earth. There were interruptions, even sudden reversals. Periods of warming gave way to sharp returns of bitter cold. At times, the glaciers advanced once more, reclaiming the ground they had already surrendered. These episodes were brief in the vast sweep of the Ice Age, but for the people and animals living through them, they were stark reminders that Earth's great transition was anything but simple. One of the most dramatic setbacks is what we now call the Younger Dryas, a sudden snap back to near-glacial conditions around 12,000 years ago. Just as the world seemed to be thawing for good, the cold returned with force, halting the glacier's retreat and plunging much of the planet into one final, unexpected freeze. For more than 1,000 years, spring seemed delayed, grasslands shriveled, and survival once again became a harsh test of endurance. Yet even this last breath of the Ice Age eventually passed. When the cold finally relented, the glaciers receded faster than ever before. Seas rose as meltwater poured in from countless rivers. Coastlines shifted. Entire lands vanished beneath the waves. Land bridges that had once carried people and animals across continents disappeared into the oceans. Beringia, the vast tundra that once joined Asia to North America, slipped beneath the waters of the Bering Strait. Doggerland, a fertile hunting ground that had connected Britain to mainland Europe, drowned beneath the swelling North Sea. As the climate warmed, forests began to march northward, replacing the sprawling grasslands of the Mammoth Steppe. Trees spread across Europe, Asia, and North America, transforming open plains into shadowed woodlands. For many Ice Age giants, built for open, frozen landscapes, this change proved devastating. Some species adapted, but many could not. For humans, however, this transformation opened new doors. As the glaciers withdrew and the climate stabilized, they discovered landscapes rich in lakes, rivers, and fertile soils. They followed the meltwaters, settled in the valleys carved by ice, and began the long transition from roaming hunters to something new, the first settlers of a warming world. Still, the glaciers never vanished without leaving a trace. Their passage was etched into the land itself. Valleys became channels for rivers. Deposits of stone and fertile silt formed the foundations of future farmlands. Their retreat marked not just the fading of an age of ice, but the dawn of the landscapes that would shape human history. The Ice Age was not fully over, but its power was broken. The vast ice walls that had once seemed immovable were dwindling, and in their place new worlds were being born. The final great floods were yet to come, bringing with them the last transformations of the planet. As the ice weakened and the Earth grew warmer, it did not simply vanish. It fractured and collapsed in stages, sometimes quietly, sometimes with catastrophic force. Beneath the shrinking sheets, water pooled in immense hidden reservoirs, held back by frozen walls that had endured for millennia. When those icy walls finally collapsed, it was as if the earth itself roared. These were no ordinary floods. They were cataclysms so immense that entire landscapes were rewritten in just days. In North America, one of the greatest examples hid beneath the Laurentide ice sheet. As it melted, an enormous reservoir known as Glacial Lake Agassiz formed, larger than all of today's Great Lakes combined. For centuries, its waters were held back by ice and land. But ice is never eternal. When its barriers gave way, the lake unleashed a deluge on a scale almost beyond human comprehension. The flood surged across the continent with unstoppable force. Valleys drowned within hours. Meandering rivers swelled into torrents miles wide. Massive boulders were swept along as effortlessly as twigs, gouging the earth and carving deep scars into the bedrock. These waters poured into the oceans, raising sea levels and reshaping climates. Each burst was like a shock to the planet's system, disrupting winds, shifting currents, and redistributing heat across the globe. And this was no isolated phenomenon. Along the margins of the retreating glaciers, countless hidden lakes lay in wait. Some broke free in violent outbursts, sending walls of water crashing across the land. Others drained more gradually, their flows carving new river systems that still endure. The Columbia River Gorge in the Pacific Northwest, for instance, bears the mark of repeated glacial floods. Colossal torrents that tore through the region again and again, leaving behind cliffs and canyons that look as though shaped by the hand of a giant. Europe, too, felt the power of these waters. As the ice retreated, meltwater pooled in vast basins until it spilled over, altering river courses and cutting entirely new paths through the land. In Siberia, plains that today seem dry and empty were once submerged beneath immense glacial lakes, held back by frozen dams that eventually broke apart, releasing their waters into the lowlands. For humans living in this shifting world, such floods must have been both devastating and transformative. Camps set along shorelines could vanish in moments. Hunting grounds that once thrived with game might be swept away forever. Yet, when the waters receded, they left behind fertile soil, new waterways, and reshaped lands that would sustain generations to come. Even the lakes that never burst played their part. Many remained for centuries after the glaciers retreated, filling the scars left by the ice. Some of the Great Lakes we know today, Superior, Michigan, Huron, are direct legacies of this age. Their basins born from the slow melting of the last continental ice sheets. These waters became far more than remnants of a vanished world. They were the foundation of new environments, shaping ecosystems and offering resources that humans would depend upon long after the Ice Age was gone. Some of these lakes endured, while others were fleeting, ghosts of the Ice Age that vanished as quickly as they appeared, draining away once their icy walls gave way. Some shrank into smaller forms, leaving behind vast, empty shorelines etched like fading memories into the land itself. For the people who lived through these transformations, it must have felt as though the very ground beneath them was alive and shifting. One generation could grow up beside a massive lake, its far-off shores barely visible. The next might find nothing but open plains, or a river flowing where water had never been before. Within the span of human memory, the land was in constant motion, reshaping itself in ways that demanded endless adaptation. But these hidden lakes and catastrophic floods were not only endings, they were beginnings. They swept away the last fragments of a glacial world and carved out the foundations of the landscapes we know today. They gave rise to the river valleys where future civilizations would one day flourish. They enriched plains with fertile soils carried from the ice. In their sudden violence and in their silent retreat, they marked the final struggles of the Ice Age as it gave way to a warmer, greener planet. Yet even as the waters reshaped the land, another drama was unfolding: the fate of the great beasts that had ruled this frozen realm. The Ice Age itself was melting away, and with it, the very creatures that had defined it. For tens of thousands of years, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths had reigned supreme. They had evolved to thrive in a world of endless cold winds and sprawling grasslands. But as the climate shifted, the foundation of their survival began to crumble. The first blow came from the changing environment. As glaciers withdrew, the mammoth steppe, the vast, dry grassland that had supported countless herds, began to vanish. In its place, forests crept northward, closing in on territory that had once been wide open. For creatures built for open plains, this new world was suffocating. The grasses that had sustained them disappeared under spreading canopies, replaced by plants they could not easily digest. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses pushed forward as far as they could, but the advancing forests blocked their passage. Steppe bison and wild horses, once free to roam across continents, saw their ranges broken into fragments. The predators that depended on these herds, dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, cave lions, found their food dwindling. Piece by piece, the intricate balance of Ice Age life began to unravel. But climate alone did not seal their fate. At the same time, humans were spreading into every corner of this changing world. With tools refined over millennia and knowledge passed from generation to generation, they had become hunters of remarkable skill. A small band armed with spears could bring down a mammoth. What had once been a rare and perilous act grew more common as populations increased and hunting strategies became more advanced. Some argue it was not hunting alone that doomed the giants, but the combination of human pressure and a warming climate. These animals were already struggling against shrinking habitats and vanishing food. Human hunters pushed them past the breaking point. Evidence lies scattered across the globe. In Siberia, mammoths preserved in permafrost still bear wounds from human weapons. In North America, mammoth kill sites reveal signs of coordinated hunts. Bones split open for marrow, flesh stripped clean. These were not isolated moments, but part of a larger pattern repeated wherever humans and megafauna crossed paths. And yet, not all of these titans vanished at once. Some clung to survival, holding on at the edges of a world that was rapidly slipping away on the isolated Arctic island of Wrangel. A small band of mammoths managed to endure for millennia after their relatives had disappeared from the mainland. Cut off from the rest of the world by rising seas, they grew smaller and weaker over generations, shadows of the towering giants they had once been. Yet still they survived, until at last even this final refuge could no longer sustain them. Their disappearance marked the closing note of a vanished age. The extinction of the great beasts did not come all at once. It unfolded in waves, some regions losing their giants while others still echoed with the sound of their heavy steps. In Australia, the massive marsupial creatures had vanished long before the ice sheets in the north began their retreat. Across the Americas, mammoths and saber-toothed cats endured longer, holding on until a warming climate and the spread of humans finally tipped the balance. By the time the Ice Age gave way to the climate we know today, the great herds were gone, leaving only bones scattered across the earth and a silence where their thunder once rolled. This extinction winter reshaped the planet as profoundly as the melting glaciers themselves. With the loss of the giants, ecosystems shifted. Grasslands, once maintained by endless herds of mammoths and bison, quickly surrendered to advancing forests. Predators that had relied on these vast prey either vanished or adapted to smaller animals. And for humans, the absence of towering beasts meant stepping into a quieter, emptier world. Still, fragments of that wilder time persist. The muskox endures in the Arctic tundra, a living remnant of the Ice Age steppe. Bison still roam, though in smaller numbers than their ancestors, who once blanketed entire continents. Even modern elephants carry the ancient legacy of mammoths within their blood. But the true giants of the Ice Age live on now only in frozen remains, in fossilized bones, and in the faint memory of a world that once was. Their disappearance was not simply an ending, but the beginning of something new. With the glaciers gone and the great animals fading, the stage was set for the rise of a world that more closely resembles our own. When the last of the giants fell silent and the ice sheets withdrew for good, Earth entered a transformation unimaginable to those who had known only the frozen age. The once stark and windswept world of ice and dust began to soften. The sharp ridges carved by glaciers mellowed into valleys. Rivers swelled, forests crept forward, and the land shifted from white to green. The warming was slow, yet its mark was everywhere. The vast sheets of ice that had ruled the northern continents for tens of thousands of years shrank back toward the poles. As they retreated, new valleys opened, wide plains stretched unbroken, and scars left behind by the grinding glaciers filled with meltwater, forming lakes that anchored the rebirth of life. The endless grasslands of the mammoth steppe gradually yielded to trees. Birch and pine took root first, hardy pioneers in thin soils and cold climates. Later came oak, elm, and broad-leaved forests, spreading northward as the Earth's climate stabilized. In just a few thousand years, lands that had once been open and treeless transformed into deep, shaded woodlands. The boundless horizons of the Ice Age gave way to dense canopies of green. With these forests came new life. Deer moved into the sheltered groves, followed by wild boar and smaller grazers that thrived in the shadows of the trees. The age of the open steppe was ending, replaced by a world of forests and new beginnings. Wolves, once the relentless hunters of vast herds, adjusted to the forested world. They grew stealthier, refining their hunting skills to match the shadows beneath the trees. Humans, too, transformed alongside the land, no longer trailing the endless migrations of mammoths or bison. They turned their focus to the elusive game of the forests. Bows and arrows replaced heavy spears, allowing them to strike from a distance, while new tools emerged, crafted not for the open steppe, but for life beneath the canopy. The rivers that poured from the melting glaciers carried nutrients into the land, creating fertile corridors brimming with life. Fish filled the waterways, birds nested along the shores, and wetlands formed in glacial hollows, each one buzzing with new species. Where once scarcity had ruled, abundance now flourished. Even the seas were reshaped. As ice returned its waters to the oceans, coastlines shifted inward. Coastal plains were lost beneath rising tides, yet in their place, new bays and estuaries bloomed with marine life. These meeting points of sea and land became rich hunting grounds for humans, who gathered shellfish, caught fish, and once again adapted to a transforming world. But the changes were not only physical, they altered the rhythm of life itself. The Ice Age had been a world of extremes, endless winters broken by frantic bursts of summer. Now the seasons began to balance. Spring lingered longer, summers softened, winters eased. The world remained demanding, but its pace grew gentler, its opportunities more varied. This new rhythm opened doors that had never existed before. For the first time, humans began staying in one place for longer stretches of time. Every valley carved by ice, every boulder stranded far from its origin, and every layer of sediment trapped in stone quietly recalls a world once frozen beneath endless skies of snow and wind. The most striking of these traces are the landscapes themselves. Across North America and Europe, U-shaped valleys bear the unmistakable mark of glaciers. Unlike rivers, which carve narrow, winding channels, ice scoured everything in its path, leaving broad, deep valleys with sheer walls and flat floors, the silent testament to the slow, grinding power of ancient ice sheets. Scattered across the plains, isolated boulders tell another part of the story. These glacial erratics, some as large as houses, were carried hundreds of miles within the ice and left behind as the glaciers melted. They stand where no mountain could have formed them, monuments to journeys that ended thousands of years before humans built their first cities. Lakes, too, are relics of this frozen past. The Great Lakes, the Finger Lakes, and countless smaller lakes across the northern hemisphere were all shaped by the immense weight of glaciers. As the ice receded, these deep scars filled with meltwater, becoming the freshwater giants we know today. Each ripple on their surface is a reminder of an age when the world was locked in ice. Yet the most delicate whispers of the Ice Age lie hidden where we cannot see them. Beneath Greenland and Antarctica, ancient layers of ice trap air bubbles preserved for hundreds of thousands of years. Scientists drill deep into these frozen archives, extracting cores that read like the pages of a history book. Each layer preserves a moment in time, recording the atmosphere, temperature, and even the dust carried by winds long vanished. Through these frozen records, we've learned how the Ice Age began, its cycles of cold and warmth, and how it gradually released its grip. Beneath our feet, other traces remain. Vast deposits of wind-blown dust, left during the Ice Age, stretch across China, Europe, and North America. These pale layers, dropped in thick blankets by icy winds, still nourish today's farmlands. Every harvest grown in these soils is a quiet legacy of glaciers that once stripped the land bare. Even the bones of the Ice Age endure, pulled from frozen ground and deep caves where they have slept for millennia, silent witnesses to a world long past. Perfectly preserved mammoths, their fur still intact, emerge from the Siberian permafrost. Across North America, the bones of mastodons and giant ground sloths rest buried beneath peat bogs, while in Europe, The skulls of cave lions and dire wolves lie hidden in caverns once warmed by the fires of early humans. These remains are more than fossils. They are direct windows into a world where cold and survival dictated every aspect of life. The stories etched into stone, ice, and bone are not merely relics of the past. They reveal how the Ice Age shaped the world we inhabit today. Fertile soils, river valleys, coastlines, all were sculpted during that frozen era. Even the distribution of plants and animals across continents traces back to the slow advance and retreat of glaciers. To traverse these landscapes now is to walk in the footsteps of a vanished world. A hiker along a glacial valley, a farmer tilling the rich dust of an ancient lush plain, a scientist studying a fragment of mammoth tusk. They are all connecting with the same story, a story written in stone, water, and bone rather than words. These traces are not only silent reminders, they are clues, fragments of a puzzle we are still piecing together. Every mapped valley, every ice core drilled, every fossil discovered deepens our understanding, not just of the Ice Age, but of the forces that continue to shape our planet. Following these whispers through stone and ice, we realize that the past is never truly gone. It lives beneath our feet, hidden in the landscapes we encounter every day. Though the Ice Age ended thousands of years ago, its fingerprints remain everywhere. Every valley, every river course, every coastline is a legacy of that frozen past. The world we inhabit is not separate from the Ice Age. It is the world the Ice Age left behind. The echoes of that era are most visible in the land itself. The Great Lakes, carved by the relentless weight of glaciers, still hold a fifth of Earth's freshwater. The smooth hills of New England and the broad plains of northern Europe are layered with glacial sediments, their soils enriched by dust and rock left behind as the ice receded. Even many modern rivers follow paths first carved by torrents of glacial meltwater. In the far north, the Ice Age's presence is still tangible. Siberia, Alaska, and northern Canada remain frozen for much of the year, their permafrost locking away the remnants of a vanished world. In this frozen ground, mammoth bones still emerge, accompanied by traces of plants and microbes that have slept since the coldest days of the Pleistocene. Our atmosphere, too, bears the imprint of the Ice Age. Carbon dioxide levels and the rhythms of Earth's climate were shaped in part by these frozen cycles. Ocean currents, wind patterns, and the systems that drive storms and rainfall across the planet were influenced by the glaciers' sculpting of continents and the shifting weight of Earth's crust. Even today, the planet continues to adjust to the immense burden of ice that once pressed upon it, rising millimeter by millimeter in a slow rebound that began thousands of years ago and has yet to finish. The legacy of the Ice Age continues to live on in the creatures that roam our planet. Bison still traverse the plains of North America, descendants of the vast herds that once grazed alongside mammoths. Musk oxen, shaggy and resilient, endure on the Arctic tundra, little changed from their Ice Age forebears. Reindeer and caribou, migrating across the northern lands each year, follow paths carved not only by instinct but by memory, a memory that stretches back to the age of ice and wind. Even within humans, traces of that frozen era remain. Our ancestors moved across land bridges exposed by low seas, followed the herds across the mammoth steppe, and mastered survival in a cold that would have been lethal to the unprepared. The skills they honed, fire, tools, cooperation, did not vanish with the ice. They became the foundation for everything that followed. In the fields we farm, in the rivers and coastlines we trace, in the animals that still roam the tundra, and in the bones buried beneath the soil, the Ice Age persists. Perhaps its most profound lesson is a reminder of change. Entire ecosystems rose and fell. Oceans rose and receded. Giants roamed and disappeared. And yet life endured, adapted, and found new ways forward. The frozen world may have vanished, but its story remains alive. In the ground beneath us, in the fossils we uncover, and in the landscapes that surround us. The Ice Age is not merely a chapter of the past. It is the prologue to the present. If one could step back into the Ice Age, leaving behind today's forests and rivers, the first thing noticed would be the silence. The wind would still sweep, snow would still fall, but beneath it all would be a deep stillness, a quiet that stretches time itself. The horizon would open into endless plains, the sky vast and boundless. Herds of mammoths would move slowly across the steppe, their breath rising in clouds. Bison would graze in lines that seemed to stretch forever. And beyond them, predators would trail, silent, patient. The cold would bite, but the world would feel vividly alive, raw in scale and presence. By a glacier's edge, blue ice would gleam in the sunlight, water trickling down its face, the beginning of rivers that would one day carve continents. And in the lands beyond, traces of humans would appear. A circle of huts made from bone and hide, smoke rising from a central fire, footprints in the snow, tools laid out for sharpening, hunters returning from the horizon, weathered by wind and cold. For them, this frozen world was not distant or strange. It was home. To walk through it would be to witness the earth in its most honest form. No cities, no roads, no walls. Just nature's patient, relentless work shaping everything over millennia. The Ice Age was not a prison. It was a teacher, a sculptor, a beginning. And though its glaciers have gone, its presence lingers. It remains in valleys and lakes carved by ice, in soils that feed our crops, in animals that roam the far north. It lives in our history, in the fires our ancestors kindled, in the tools they carried across the endless snow. Stand outside on a winter night, when the air is sharp and the world still, and one can almost feel it. A memory that is not our own. Written in stone beneath our feet, carried on the wind, whispered in the quiet weight of time. The Ice Age did not simply vanish. It shaped the ground we walk on and the lives we live. Its story is etched into the world, faint yet enduring, like footsteps in ancient snow. And so, as we leave the frozen world behind, we carry it within us. Every glacier, every herd, every fleeting camp of our ancestors led to this moment. The Ice Age may be gone, but its story remains imprinted on the earth and within us. When we look at rivers, hills, or the quiet sweep of the sky, we are seeing its legacy. When the winter wind brushes our faces, we touch something ancient, a faint echo of a time when survival was the only language and snow never truly ceased. We live now in warmth and change, but the world that came before continues to shape us. Understanding that allows us to see our place not apart from history, but as its continuation. The Ice Age never truly ends. It lingers in stone, water, memory, and quiet. If we pause and listen, it is still there, patient and waiting.